Welcome to another live session by Tutorac. In this live session, we have something very special for you, which is a part of every software engineer's everyday life. So as software engineers, what do we mostly do? We mostly sit and start to look into our code and start writing some more code, right? As a software engineer, it is our primary responsibility to maintain and develop the current features and also develop new features. Moreover, we try to do a lot of look through to a lot of code which might be written by us or maybe some other developer in the team. That is something that we do a lot. And in this process of actually writing code, sometimes we actually do encounter things that are not right into their place. So what are these things called? These things are called as bugs. There are so many different types of bugs that can exist into any person's code. These bugs are basically some problems that might go overlooked. They can be very simplest of problems like maybe a logical error, maybe some code related error or whatsoever. There can be different types of bugs that can be present inside your code. As long as your code is not working properly and also not throwing an error, it might be very well categorized as a bug. A bug might also be a situation where the code is working absolutely fine, but it is not working according to the requirements, or it is not working according to the expectations of what was required for. So there are different situations when a bug can appear inside your code, and we as software engineers have to deal with these bugs technically every day. I, as a software engineer, have totally lost count of how many bugs I might have solved in my journey as a software engineer for the last 3 years. So, but I also at the same time realize that bug hunting and understanding where the bug can be present inside my code has always been an integral part of me being a software engineer. It makes me a better software engineer, and the ideas that I follow in order to find where the bug might be and to understand what can be the reason or what can be the way to fix it is actually a true sense or true spirit that every software engineer requires. So whether you are an aspirant of being a software engineer or maybe an experienced professional by yourself, you might find one or two learnings out of this live session. So in this particular session, not only I'm just going to talk about the kind of bugs that might exist in the world of software engineering and the kind of bugs you might have to deal with on your daily life as a software engineer yourself, or maybe any project you might be creating by yourself, but also we might also be dealing with some real-time action where I will be sitting and sharing my screen with all of you and try to find out some code and try to find out some bug in these code so that we can all understand a process of how we can all try to debug these bugs. One point that I want to add is a process called as debugging. So this is a very famous word in the world of technological advancements. And in this technological world, we use the word debugging a lot. Now, you might be able to get an inference from the word itself that what debug might mean. As the word itself suggests, debugging means a process with the help of which we might be able to eradicate or remove the bugs that are currently present into our system. So debugging is usually a line-by-line execution of the code that we try to do by ourselves to understand what is happening at every stage of the code and then identify where the code might be going wrong, which is the reason why it might not be giving us the expected results. So we will be making use of the process of debugging inside our code editors live in front of you to understand how we can find out the bugs that are present on our systems. So these are some small points that I wanted to talk to you about debugging. Apart from doing all the things that I just mentioned, I am also going to welcome all of you to put down your questions or thoughts about anything you feel like relevant to this session into the chat box so that I can take it up into the session. And yep, that's pretty much it. That's the things that we are going to cover inside the session. So now let's try to move to my screen and let's try to look at our first snippet of code and try to understand what kind of bugs are present inside this code. Coming to my screen, as you can see that I have currently opened an IDE called as IntelliJ IDEA. For those people who do not know about this IDE, it's a software which is used for mostly Java-based development, which is the reason why on my screen you're looking at a piece of code written in Java. So here you can see two functions that are present. One is the default main function, and then there is another function that I have created called factorial. So this function's expectation, or the the kind of output that we're expecting out of this function, is that whenever we give a number as an input, we want the output as the factorial of that number. So it is a very simple code. Now, factorial is basically nothing but a mathematical concept, which means, or which is associated with a number. So if we say factorial of a number, it means we want to multiply the number with all of its numbers, or until it reaches 0, something like that. So in case if you want factorial of 5, it would mean 5 multiplied by 4, multiplied by 3, multiplied by 2, and then multiplied by 1. That is what factorial of a number means. So the code has been written in a very similar way. It is a recursive approach to write the code, and you can see that what it does is, if the value for n, which is the number that we expect the factorial for, is equal to 0, then we get nothing but 1. Otherwise, we see that we are trying to calculate factorial of n minus 1, and then multiplying it with n, because factorial of 5 is equal to 5 multiplied by factorial of 4. Similarly, factorial of 4 is equal to 4 multiplied by factorial of 3, and so on and on and on. Okay, so this is the logic that I have written, and if I run this code, you will see that factorial of 5 is equal to 120, which is actually correct. So you might be saying, Shantanu, the code is working absolutely fine. What was the point of saying that there is a bug in this code, and what could be the reason why you chose this particular snippet as a moment of truth, or something to identify where a bug can be happening inside our project? Well, there is one very interesting reason. Let me just show it to you. Suppose instead of writing number as 5, I make it minus 5. And if I try to run it, then you will see that it goes into an endless loop, right? You can see there's a very strong error that is present on my screen, and it says exception in thread main, and says the error as java.lang stack overflow error. This is because, or this is happening because, a negative number cannot have a factorial. So this particular snippet of code is not covering its edge cases, or when we say edge cases, it means those cases which will have an answer which is predefined. So there is no negative factorial. There is no factorial of any negative number, which is why as soon as I passed minus 5 into this function, the function started to misbehave or started to throw an error. So that is exactly what we are seeing on my screen. So we found one bug, that is, this particular question or this particular function is not handling all the scenarios that it should handle. Instead of basically like taking a negative number and giving an error like stack overflow error, it may very well give us an error by saying that the number should not be a negative value. Let's try to refactor our code in a way to find out that the number should not be negative. So in this case, let's go ahead and do it. So what I will do is I'll write if n is less than 0, which means that n is negative, then I will throw a new error or exception. I'll just write runtime exception, and I will say number cannot be negative. Okay, this is what I will say. Now if I try to run it, you will see an error which says number cannot be negative. So now it is very well handling the situation of a negative number coming into place and giving us a relevant error message also. So any single time this particular function is called from any place, we will at least know what error came, and we might define our own error, or we might be able to define our own error handling situations for this error specifically. Otherwise, it would have been difficult to identify what sort of error came and how we can handle the situation as the time would progress, or as somebody else might be using this function. Now with this error, we have definitely been able to find that bug and also fix it by throwing an error which actually makes sense. So this is the idea behind this particular question. Let's try to move to another question. In the meantime, I think I'll go ahead and check in case if we have any questions. Right now we don't. Well, that's okay. In case if you have any questions, please feel free to write them down in the comment section. I will take them as fast as I can. All right, let's move to the next question or next snippet of code, which is again in Java, so that we can identify any present bugs that might be present in the code. So coming to the second file that I have created, and I have named it sum array. Okay, so what is the purpose of this particular function that is written on my screen? It's a very simple function, and it has nothing but an array of numbers which is going from 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. It says, or its purpose is to calculate the sum of all the numbers that are present inside the array. Very, very, very simple piece of code, right? I think this is something that anybody who has started their journey in programming might have done it already or might be very close to doing it for the very first time. So adding all the numbers in a list is a very simple piece of code, and then we will try to identify what might be going wrong with this snippet of code. Let's try to run it first. So once we run it, we immediately see an error which says array index out of bounds exception. And it says index 5 is out of bounds for length 5. Now, what does that mean? It means that this particular array is actually trying, or somebody is trying to access the index 5 for this array. But the main question is, are 5 indices present inside this array? Or can you actually access the 5th index of this array? Let's try to have a look at this particular array. So if I copy this and if I paste it over here, okay, this is where I've pasted it. So the index for 1 is going to be 0, for the index for 2 is going to be 1, for 3 it's going to be 2, for 4 it's going to be 3, and for 5 it's going to be 4. There is no 5th index of this array. Okay, that is what I'm able to infer from the type this array is written. Now coming back to this error, you can see that the error is coming at Java somearray.java line 8, which is present over here. So it means that somebody is trying to access the 5th element over here. Now, because the error is coming while accessing this particular value, especially when the value for I is 5, we have to understand why the value for I would actually be equal to 5. Look at this loop conditions that are present inside this for block. Over here, you might say I equals 0, and then you see I is less than equal to numbers.length. Now, it says less than and equal to. Now, what is the value for numbers.length? It would mean the length of the numbers array, which in this case is going to be equal to 5. Length and size of an array are basically the same thing. So it means in this case the size or length of the numbers array, which is equal to 5, and then length of an array is basically the number of elements that are present inside that array. In this case, only 5 elements are present, so numbers.length will evaluate to 5. And you can see the condition which says I less than equal to 5, which means that the value for I will actually be equal to 5 at one point of time, given the conditions of loop that has been written. Now, following the same strategy, you can see that the value for I will actually become 5, and therefore it will be throwing this error. But do we actually need 5? No, we don't. We don't necessarily need the 5th index in this array, right? We need the array index until the last, which is numbers.length minus 1. So if I write minus 1 also, and if I try to run it, then we might not be seeing this error in the first place. So this is one way of fixing this error or bug. And the other way of fixing this bug is, instead of writing minus 1, I can just change this to less than and not less than equal to. And now that I run it, it's again coming as 15. So I was able to identify what is the place where the code could have gone wrong. It gave you a detailed explanation of what was my thinking strategy to find out whether the error was coming or not, and then also solve this problem. Do you remember a few minutes ago, I was telling you about debugging? In case if you have joined the session right now, debugging is nothing but a process with the help of which we try to remove the bugs that are present inside our piece of code. So let's try to use debugging inside my IntelliJ IDEA or any editor of your choice to see line by line execution of your code so that it gives us a better picture in understanding the problem that is happening. Okay, so I'm going to revert the code back to the way it was. Now that I've reverted it, I will try to put something called as a breakpoint. Now this is a new terminology that I'm introducing to you. A breakpoint is basically a line number in a file that you try to highlight by yourself, and this particular line is an indication to your computer by saying that you want the code to pause at that line. When I say pause, that means every single piece of code that is written before or that is supposed to be executed before that line will be executed, and the code will come to this line and pause itself. So you will be able to see real-time values of all the variables that are present inside your program until the pause is maintained. Let me just show you with the help of an example. So to add a breakpoint, usually in all IDEs, what you have to do is choose the line number, like in this case 567 is what I have, right? So I will go here at 8 and put a breakpoint like this. Now you can see that on my IntelliJ IDEA, this line has been highlighted, right? This line has been highlighted in red, and this is usually the color for all the code editors that they use for highlighting highlighting a line that has a breakpoint attached to it. Now that we were running it by going to the context menu and clicking on run. But this time, instead of clicking on run, I will try to click on debug. So if I click on debug, it is very similar to run, but on the other hand, it shows you something else. As you can see that currently line 8 is highlighted now in blue, which is signifying that your code has paused at line 8. So every single piece of code that was supposed to run before this pause happened has already run. And the line which is currently highlighted by the breakpoint, that line is currently about to be executed, and it is going to wait for its execution to complete unless you command it. So you will be able to see a few buttons over here. So you see this green button. This green button is actually a button called resume program. What it is going to do is it is going to make sure that your code does not stop until a next breakpoint occurs. Okay, so right now you can see the values for all the variables that are currently present in my program. So you can see the value for numbers, which is an array 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You can see the value for sum. You can see the value for I. You can see the value for numbers I. And you can also see the value for numbers.length. Even if I highlight over here, you can see the values. So you can also see values over here. So every code editor has a different way of showing the values that are present at any certain stage in the code, but it is definitely possible. Okay, so now that we have debugged it, you can see the value for I is currently equal to 0. Now let's try to see if the value for I is actually going to become equal to 5. If we pause at the next breakpoint, because of the nature of the loop, the i's value will change from 0 to 1, then it will change from 0 to 2, then 3, you can see it changing over here, then 4, and then 5. Okay, so you can see that the value for I is actually becoming 5. Now this is an area that you have identified with the help of debugging the code line by line to understand where it can be going wrong, and then let's go ahead and fix it. So the fix of the code is going to be the same. We will just remove the greater than sign, less than equal to sign, and change it to less than. And now that we run it, it is never going to be equal to 5, and we are going to get the sum. I see that a question has popped up. Let's go and check it out. So there's a question that says, how do I tackle bug in database where I have not written maximum code? Okay, how should I tackle the bug in a huge database where I have not written maximum code? Okay, so whenever we talk about databases, the bugs that are related with database can come in situations on, or it is based on the idea of how you are trying to access the database. To access the database or to query the database, are you actually querying the database through the database itself, or you're using a software to query the database? For example, you might have connected this database to any piece of code or your server or your backend application or whatsoever way. You need to first help me understand whether the errors that you're getting in relation with your database are coming on the ideas of you querying the database directly by writing database query, like for example SQL queries or whatever database you are using, the queries for that database inside the tool for the database, or you are actually getting these errors at the time of connecting your application with a piece of code, or maybe with your backend application. So I think I need that clarification first before I completely answer your question. In case if you find the clarification for this, please feel free to write that down in the chat box or comment section, and I will take it up as soon as I can. All right, so coming back to my screen, I was just telling you about line by line execution of this Java piece of code, and we were very successfully able to figure out what errors could have happened inside this piece of code. Okay, so now for people who don't really fancy Java that much, I also have this kind of a small exercise on a language which you might actually like and which you actually would have studied. Especially if you're from college, you might like this part of this live video slightly more. Okay, so this time I have a different programming language for this bug hunting exercise, and it is our favorite, JavaScript. All right, so I have increased the text size on my laptop, and let's try to identify some bugs that are present in this particular file. Okay, so coming to this file, we see reverse string as a function, right? We see reverse string as a function. The main purpose of this function is to actually reverse a string. Suppose you have a string called as hello, H-E-L-L-O, then it should output me as O-L-L-E-H, something like that, which means the string has completely been reversed. That is what we are expecting. Let's try to see if it is actually running fine first, and if it doesn't, then what can be a possible bug that is present on the code. So let's come to my terminal and let's try to run it. To run this file, there are two ways. So I'm trying to run it currently in Visual Studio Code. So I can just click on run and then click on run without debugging. So as soon as I run it, it'll ask me how I want to run it. So I'll choose Node.js and it says my hello string, reverse string is also currently equal to hello. Now, the main question is, does it actually make sense? Does it actually make sense? Like it is definitely running, but the input string and the output is basically the same. That means reversal is not happening, right? So we need to understand what could actually be going wrong in this code because of which the string is not getting reversed right now. Okay, so firstly, we will try to debug this code. So I will try to put my breakpoint at line number 2 itself. You can see that the red dot is denoting the breakpoint, very similar to how it was being denoted in my IntelliJ IDEA. And now instead of clicking run without debugging, I will click on start debugging. So as soon as I click on start debugging, you will see Visual Studio Code's its own interface for debugging, which is true for all the programming languages you write in Visual Studio Code. So here you will see that the value for reversed is an empty string, and this highlighted line is nothing but the line which is actually currently paused. Okay, so you will see a button like this, step over. We also had a very similar button in case of Java based programs, which is over here, step over. So all the debugging tools will also have a button called as step over. So step over is basically going to tell you, or it's an instruction for your debugger to go to the next line of code, whether a breakpoint exists there or does not exist there. Okay, so I am using this to go to the next line of code. Currently the value for reversed is actually an empty string, and str is actually a string which means hello over here. So I will try to go to the next line. Now you can see the value for I is currently 0, and str.char I is basically what? Str.char I is also equal to h, which means that reversed is going to add its value to h, or h is going to be attached to reverse. Now the problem with this is that technically what we are doing is we are taking a character from the str variable that is present on my screen and just putting it exactly in the same order in reverse string, which is what we don't have to do, and this is where a logical error exists inside our code. So let's try to change this situation and try to add it in a proper manner in case of our code. So what I will do, I will close my code. So what I'll do is just click on stop. This will terminate my code. Okay. So over here, what I will be doing is I need to change the order or the way this particular loop has been written. So I will take the last element first. So what I will write str.length -1. Okay, and then this thing should be equal to greater than equal to 0, and then I minus minus. Okay, so now what will happen? We will take elements from the end of str and put it at the start of reversed, because of which all the elements at the end will come at the start, and therefore we will see a reverse string as soon as our code runs. Okay, let's try to go to terminal and then run and then click on start debugging. I can pass the debug point over here and expect the answers. Just a moment. Should be present over here, and now we have OLLEH, which is the right answer. Let me just show it to you without debugging as well, and this is what we get. So this is how we have successfully identified bug in our third snippet of code, which is currently written in JavaScript. So we could see that what it is doing is, what it was previously doing was it was taking any character at str and attaching the character at the same index in reversed, which is not what we wanted. We wanted a reversal, and that is now what we have done. Okay, great. Let's move towards the next snippet of code, which is also written in JavaScript. And yep, commenting this out, and this is our next piece of code. Okay, let's try to run this code. This particular code is just doing a very simple check whether a given number is positive, negative, or 0 itself. Okay, so over here you can see that check number is a function that I'm calling in line number 25, and it's the value that I'm passing to this function is equal to 0. Let's try to run it. I'll click on run, then click on run without debugging, and wait for my answer. It says the number is negative. Okay, it says the number is negative, but then the main question is the number actually negative? Is the number actually negative? The answer is no, right? It is equal to, or it is positive. Then why is it not working properly? Let's try to debug it. So I will try to put a breakpoint at line number 16 and then try to debug it. So I'll click on run or start debugging. And over here, you can see that the code has currently paused at line number 16. As of now, the value for num is equal to 0. But then only if you see this condition should be true, right? Because the value for num is actually equal to 0. You can see it over here as well. But for some reason, it is not working, right? So if we go to step over, you can see that it directly goes into else if, which means that this if condition is failing, right? It means that the if condition is failing. That means there's something wrong with the way we have written this particular piece of code. Okay, so I'll disconnect it right now, and then I will try to remind you of some basic principles in programming. Whenever we want to do an assignment of one variable to another, then we make use of the equality symbol or an equal to symbol, and we only use one equal to symbol. But whenever we want to check something or check the equality of two things, then we have to make sure that we use double equal to symbol. So in case if I make it double equals, as I have written it right now, and then if I try to run it, run without debugging, you will see that it says the number is 0, which is exactly what we wanted. But interestingly, in case if I write 0 as a string, and then I try to run it, run without debugging, you will still see that the number is 0. Now, this can be a slight bit of a problem because what I'm passing is actually a string and not exactly a number. So technically, it should give me an error by saying that whatever things you have passed, it is not a number in the first place. So instead of doing that, I will try to make it, or to make sure that I'm also able to check the type of the value that I'm passing, and making sure that it is a number, I will make sure that I, instead of using double equals, use triple equals. In case if you're new to JavaScript, triple equal to is a kind of concept in JavaScript, which makes sure that whatever things that you're trying to compare, you not only test its equality, but you also test its type. So here, type checking and value checking both are happening. Similarly, over here, you can make sure it's written like this. No, I think it's fine. And yep, that's pretty much it. So this code is completely fine as of now. And now if we run it, we can also run it like this, node tutorac.js, and you will see that the number is negative, but it's incorrectly being handled, right? It is incorrectly being handled. So we need to make sure that if it is not a number, then it needs to be handled in a different way. So I will write an if condition which says type of num not equals to number. Then in that case, I will write, let's say console.log, the value is not a number. Okay, something like this. So let's try to run it again. And this time we see the value is not a number. Also, I need to make sure that it stops here only. So I'll just make a use of a return statement. Now this function is working exactly the way we would expect it to. So this is how we basically found out a few bugs in the code across different programming languages. And we were also able to talk about the ways I would particularly be using to find out these bugs. So these included logical bugs and logical thinking towards finding these bugs, and also how we can see the code's actual real-time inputs and outputs by trying to debug the code line by line. That is what we did. Some very popular software engineers or many software engineers working in major companies have to deal with production level code. So it's not always possible to find out error inside a code without understanding what the problem could be. We need to sometimes identify where the code might have gone wrong. So usually all the developers will actually make use of a concept called as logs. Logs are nothing but statements which you actually add in the middle of your code to identify the situations that might have happened inside your code. These situations can be positive or these situations can be negative. So we look for a negative log, or we look for a log which is not expected. And then we try to identify where this could have happened, backtrack our code to that place, or we try to replicate this error and then we fix it by following this method of line by line debugging into our own system. So these are some very popular ways of finding bugs inside your code. I hope this session was helpful to you, and I hope I was able to answer most of your queries that are landing or that are in concern with finding bugs as a software engineer. I hope you liked the session as well, and in case if there were any questions inside your mind that I could not answer, please feel free to drop them down in the comment section and I will get back to them the first chance I get. Thank you very much.